Night, that ancient archivist of mankind's most embarrassing spiritual moments, opened its great velvet ledger and wrote your name next to a candle stain. Because every story begins with a flame, and every flame begins by pretending it is brighter than the darkness surrounding it. And so, here you are, and here I am. And somewhere between us floats that thin, trembling question humans have whispered for centuries, mostly when they're tired, or bored, or regretting a promise they made at a religious retreat. What happens when faith fails? Not quietly, but spectacularly. Not with dignity, not with solemnity, but with the tragicomic elegance of someone tripping over their own rosary beads. You'd think faith would collapse like a cathedral, majestic, solemn, accompanied by distant choirs and a soft golden haze. But no, faith, the poor thing, usually falls apart like a wooden chair under a very confident man. Loud, unexpected, a little embarrassing, and with witnesses you wish weren't there. Imagine incense swirling in slow circles, pretending to understand the mysteries of existence better than you do. Imagine the faint crackle of old parchment full of instructions no one actually follows. Imagine the moon leaning against the sky like a tired monk who's lost his sandals and his conviction. And into this atmosphere, half sacred, half absurd, steps the question that has ruined countless nights of sleep. What if we misunderstood everything? What if the divine runs on paperwork? What if miracles get lost in celestial bureaucracy? What if angels are just very tired civil servants? And what if your most earnest prayer ended up in the cosmic spam folder because you misspelled forgive? The night knows, but the night does not gossip. So instead, it hands you stories. The way a priest hands out blessings, gently, cryptically, and with the hope you don't ask follow-up questions. Tonight's tale is wrapped in dust, holy dust, the kind that collects on ancient reliquaries and forgotten hopes. You can almost smell it. That mixture of incense, candle wax, and spiritual overconfidence. A world where mortals cling to their beliefs like children clutching a blanket, ignoring the suspicious holes forming near the seams. And before we begin, before we journey into temples where prayers echo ironically against stone walls that have heard too many confessions to believe any of them anymore, before we enter monasteries dimly lit by candles that flicker as if gossiping among themselves, before the protagonist appears, blessed, burdened, and blissfully unaware that their faith is about to collapse in the most theatrical way possible. Pause, because apparently even spiritual stories require rituals. So, before you settle in, pretending this is just background noise, do the holy thing. Like the video and subscribe. Only if you feel called by the algorithmic divine, of course, which, let's be honest, is the only deity that consistently answers prayers anymore. Now, breathe. Slowly, as if inhaling centuries of doubts trapped in old monasteries. Let the candlelight soften your gaze. Let the shadows stretch like monks performing midnight yoga. Let the story seep into you the way sacred water seeps into stone, quietly, insistently, and with a slight aftertaste of irony. Because tonight, faith will tremble, hope will hiccup, belief will improvise, and the divine, oh, the divine, will pretend not to notice the mess. This is the threshold, the holy doorway between I know exactly what I believe, and I may have made several theological mistakes. Walk through it, softly, sarcastically, and allow yourself to drift into the first whisper of a long night, where every sacred thing has a shadow, and every shadow has a sense of humor. The world you're about to enter was built out of stone, superstition, and the unmistakable scent of old incense, the kind that refuses to leave a room even after centuries of open windows and half-hearted exorcisms. A monastery perched on a cliff, so dramatically placed that you would think the architects did it on purpose to impress the divine, or perhaps to discourage visitors. Either way, the result was the same. A holy structure dangling over the edge of the abyss, like a theological metaphor someone forgot to finish. You could hear the wind there. Not the normal wind, but the kind that whistles judgmentally, as if correcting your posture or your spiritual life choices. It rattled through the halls at dawn, wove itself between cracked pillars, and brushed past ancient icons whose painted eyes had seen enough human confusion to qualify for sainthood. Everything smelled of wax, dust, and mild desperation. Candles that had been burning since before the concept of punctuality. Scrolls so old the handwriting had begun to curl inward, as if ashamed of its own bold claims. Prayer beads smoothed by fingers that had begged the heavens for everything from rain to forgiveness, to slightly better breakfast options. And in this holy, crumbling, beautifully inconvenient place lived our protagonist. His name, well, names are inconveniently mortal, easily forgotten, and usually misspelled in sacred registries. So let's simply call him the brother, because he certainly wasn't brave enough for monk, and definitely too tired for saint. He had been in the monastery for so many years that time had stopped feeling linear. Days looped like rosary circles. Seasons slipped by like metaphors in a sermon crafted by someone who hadn't slept enough. Morning bells rang with the same enthusiasm as someone hitting snooze on destiny. The brother awoke every day at an hour that could only be described as spiritually unnecessary. Before the sun, before the birds, before God, at least in his opinion. He shuffled through the corridor half asleep, half aware, half resigned. Yes, mathematically speaking, that's too many halves, but monastic life was never known for accuracy. Every morning he dipped his fingers into the cold stone basin of holy water, and every morning, without fail, he whispered the same half-hearted prayer. Let today be different. It never was. But he still said it, the way some people water dead plants out of habit or greet neighbors they actively avoid, because faith in his life was no longer a burning conviction, just something he did between yawns, like stretching or regretting his life choices. He prayed not out of fervor, but because everyone else was doing it. He knelt not to honor the divine, but because the floor was surprisingly warm where the sunbeam hit. He recited long sacred texts not out of devotion, but because the cadence helped him stay awake. His fellow monks never suspected anything. They thought he was pious, dedicated, spiritually mature, mostly because he nodded solemnly at all the right moments and had perfected the expression of someone contemplating eternity. In truth, he was usually thinking about bread. He had contradictions woven into him like threads in an old tapestry. He believed in miracles, but avoided relying on them, the same way you might believe in public transportation, but still prefer walking. He preached humility, but secretly hoped for divine favoritism. He taught spiritual discipline, but couldn't resist an extra piece of honeyed bread when no one was looking. The monastery itself seemed to mirror his hypocrisy. Majestic from a distance, crumbling up close. Full of holy relics, yet suspiciously missing anything that actually worked. A place where every corner felt sacred and slightly drafty. And though the brother lived surrounded by chants, prophecies, old books, and people who took symbolism far too seriously, he often found himself drifting into quiet, irreverent thoughts. Thoughts like, if the divine intended us to wake up this early, why didn't it invent a kinder sunrise? Or, if humility is a virtue, why does Brother Aurelio look so smug about being humble? Or, the particularly dangerous one, does God ever read these prayers, or does he simply skim them like legal disclaimers? He walked through the temple's main hall every morning, hearing his own footsteps echo through the stones. Not majestic echoes, more like the echoes of someone slightly regretting their career path. The hall glowed with candlelight, thin flames trembling as if nervous about being watched. Shadows stretched across the floor, long and skeletal, as though trying to escape the responsibilities of representing darkness. Outside, the world was a tapestry of fog, distant bells, and the occasional crow perched like an unpaid guardian of the sacred courtyard. The brother liked the crows. At least they were honest, black, loud, unapologetic. A refreshing contrast to the pious silence inside. His daily routine was an exquisite example of spiritual contradiction. He meditated with serene posture, while mentally listing chores he hoped someone else would do. He chanted hymns with reverence, but slightly off-key, because he had never learned the correct pitch. He practiced compassion. Except toward Brother Ignacio, who snored through morning prayer with such volume and vibrato that even the statues looked annoyed. He was, in short, religious enough to belong, but not convinced enough to feel comfortable. And perhaps that is why the divine, or something pretending to be, kept circling around him like a curious moth around a candle, because those who are too certain are boring. But those who wobble, those who teeter, those who stand on the edge between faith and doubt, they are irresistible. At night, when the monastery fell silent, truly silent, the kind of silence that feels like velvet draped over the universe, the brother often wandered the cloisters. He touched the cold stone walls. He breathed the scent of old candles. He watched shadows bend like tired angels stretching their wings. And he wondered, not out loud, never out loud. He wasn't foolish enough for that. But in the deepest corners of his mind, where neither the saints nor the abbot could hear, he whispered questions. Those delicate, forbidden questions that crawl beneath your ribs when the night is too honest. What if I'm wrong? What if we all are? What if faith is a story we tell ourselves, because silence is too frightening? What if the divine prefers those who question, rather than those who obey? But every dawn, he closed those questions like windows during a storm. He resumed his role, brother devoted, brother dutiful, brother whose faith was completely fine. Thank you for asking. Even he almost believed the performance. Almost. And so he walked through his candle-lit world, an actor in a sacred play, performing holiness while carrying doubt like a pebble in his shoe. Not enough to stop him, just enough to irritate him. Little did he know that this pebble, small, persistent, uninvited, would one day grow into an avalanche. But that is still far away. For now, imagine him standing in the center of that ancient monastery at dusk, dust floating in the last light, a chill in the stones, the sound of a bell ringing, a slow, solemn toll that echoes like a warning disguised as tradition. He closes his eyes. He breathes deeply, and he believes just enough to get through the day, just enough to keep praying by habit, just enough to think everything will continue as normal. But the night knows better. The walls know better. Even the crows perched on the rooftops tilt their heads, as if anticipating a delectable theological disaster. Faith, after all, does not break silently. It cracks, it mutters, it trembles. It leaks irony like wax from a candle that burns too slowly. And soon, very soon, his world built on rituals and whispered certainties will begin to wobble. Just enough to be interesting, before his faith fractured before it, began making strange cracking sounds, like an old reliquary being pushed beyond its structural integrity, the brother believed. Not the dramatic, trumpet-blaring, miracle-seeking faith of saints carved in stone. No, his faith was more like a dependable old chair, a little wobbly, possibly termite-infested, but still functional enough to sit on while pretending everything was fine. He believed in the divine, the way someone believes in the existence of the moon during daylight, not because he saw it, not because he felt its power, but because it was simply easier than questioning every cosmic detail before breakfast. His faith, in truth, was comfortable, a warm blanket woven out of routines he never dared to change. Morning prayers, evening chants, a polite nod to the heavens whenever something went right, and a mild frown whenever it didn't. He believed in miracles, much in the same way people believe in store discounts. They happen, supposedly, occasionally, to other people, under suspiciously specific circumstances. He believed in signs, but only when they confirmed what he already wanted to think. He believed in divine will, but only as long as the divine will conveniently matched his own schedule. His faith was an elegant contradiction, a delicate lattice of devotion and convenience, spiritual longing and subtle laziness. When he prayed, he did so with eyes half open, letting the candle's glow paint soft, golden shapes on the stone floor, the kind of shapes that looked almost meaningful if you stared long enough, or if your imagination was particularly bored. Sometimes he felt something during prayer, a warmth behind the ribs, a shimmer in the air, a twinge of peace, but he never trusted those moments, because they were fleeting, like butterflies or guilt or enthusiasm. He preferred the predictable holiness of routine, the divine that behaved consistently, the mysteries that stayed politely unclear. He'd often kneel before the altar, hands folded, brow furrowed in what looked like mystical concentration. But he was usually thinking, is the divine truly listening? Or is this one of those prayers that gets sorted by an apprentice angel in training? Or, should I use more poetic wording? Does God appreciate metaphors? Or, why do these candles smell like wet sheep? Sometimes he prayed with earnest emotion, the kind that made his heart sway like a pendulum of hope. But most of the time he prayed with the resigned discipline of someone doing slow, spiritual push-ups. He carried faith the way travelers carry lucky charms, not entirely sure they work, but unwilling to risk leaving them behind. In the quiet corners of his mind, he imagined heaven as a grand celestial archive, full of scrolls containing every prayer ever whispered, stacked floor to ceiling, catalogued by angels with very small handwriting. He suspected that most of his prayers were in the section labeled miscellaneous requests, unclear intent, because even in devotion he was vague. He believed that the divine was compassionate, but occasionally absent-minded, that the universe was wise, but prone to paperwork delays, that destiny was a carefully crafted tapestry, with several loose threads and questionable color choices. He admired the faith of others, the fervent fire of Brother Aurelio, who prayed with such intensity it was rumored he once set a curtain on fire with sheer conviction, the unwavering certainty of Sister Mariel, who spoke of divine plans the way poets speak of lovers, the serene devotion of the abbot, who seemed to float when he walked, though the brother suspected it was simply very soft sandals. But his own faith was quieter, humbler, often confused. It flickered like a candle trying to decide whether to go out or keep pretending. He recalled one afternoon when he was younger, years before his doubt had grown teeth, standing under the tall stained glass windows of the monastery hall. Sunlight filtered through the colored panes, painting saints and martyrs onto the floor in trembling reds and blues. He had felt awe then, true awe, that rare, crystalline sensation that makes the world look both enormous and intimate. He remembered whispering, "I believe," and meaning it. But years, like uninvited guests, always bring something with them: weariness, routine, questions disguised as thoughts that don't really matter, tiny cracks in the crystal that slowly widen, quietly, beneath the surface. Still, he maintained the outward appearance of a man firmly anchored to divine truth. He lit candles with slow, reverent hands. He bowed with practiced humility. He fasted on holy days, though he occasionally cheated by eating sacred bread for spiritual strength. More like emotional support, but who was counting? And every evening, when the sun dipped behind the mountains and the shadows stretched like long regrets across the courtyard, the brother would sit alone and watch the sky grow dim. He called these moments his reflections, but they were more like conversations he had with himself, surrounded by stone walls that didn't judge. He would murmur thoughts aloud, so softly that even the dust motes drifting in the air could pretend not to hear. I believe, don't I? I trust, I think. I hope. When I remember to. His faith had a gentle sadness to it, the kind of sadness that knows it isn't tragic enough for poetry, but still insists on lingering in the corners of one's soul. Some nights, he clung to faith like a child clings to a lantern in the dark. Other nights, he held it the way one holds a book they don't feel like finishing. But he did believe. In something. In someone. In a presence he neither understood nor fully trusted. Faith was his companion, his shadow, his habit, his soft-spoken tether to meaning. He walked through life wrapped in a veil of gentle devotion, not blazing like fire, but glowing like embers, steady, warm, cautious. He convinced himself that faith was not about certainty, it was about endurance, that doubt was normal, as long as it didn't lead anywhere inconvenient, that the divine appreciated effort even if the results were questionable. But deep inside, deeper than he ever dared to look, something small and delicate trembled, not yet cracked, but not entirely whole. A tiny tremor, a quiet unrest, the subtle throb of a belief that wanted to be stronger but wasn't. Yet he assumed this was normal. Everyone struggles, he told himself. Everyone doubts. Everyone hides the fragile corners of their spiritual life under layers of tradition and polite reverence. So he carried on, blissfully unaware of the approaching storm, unaware of how near the breaking point lay, unaware of the moment when faith, dignity, and the thinly woven fabric of confidence would all unravel at once, because before faith fails spectacularly, it pretends everything is fine. And he believed that performance. He believed it wholeheartedly, at least for now. If faith were a cathedral, then doubt is the mischievous mouse that sneaks inside through a crack no architect admits exists. Tiny, harmless-looking, almost adorable in its insignificance. And yet, give it enough time and it will chew through sacred tapestries, gnaw on holy assumptions, and leave little droppings of uncertainty scattered across one's once spotless spiritual floor. For the brother, that mouse arrived quietly. not through thunder, not through despair, not through philosophical collapse. No, it arrived through something far more dangerous, a completely ordinary moment, the kind the universe loves to use when it wants to make a point no one asked for. It happened on an afternoon carved out of sunlight and boredom. The monastery was unusually still. No chants, no bells, no Brother Ignacio snoring through meditation with the enthusiastic rumble of a holy avalanche. Just silence, a large, echoing silence, the kind that makes your thoughts louder than they deserve to be. The brother had been sweeping the inner courtyard, a humble task, a simple chore, the sort of chore that monks perform to cultivate humility, or at least something that vaguely resembles humility when viewed from a distance. Dust swirled lazily in the golden light, rising and falling like tired angels trying to remember their choreography. The air smelled of sun-warmed stone and forgotten prayers. And then, without warning, without ceremony, without so much as a polite knock, the world shifted. Or rather, his perception of the world shifted, which is far more dangerous. It began with a voice, not the divine kind, not a booming celestial command, not a whisper carried by wind, no miracle, nothing poetic, just Brother Aurelio passing by with a bundle of wilted herbs in his hands, muttering, "The divine sees everything," completely ordinary, a phrase monks sling around with the same casual frequency as greetings or complaints about cold floors. But that day the brother paused, mid-sweep, mid-breath, mid-life almost. Everything slowed. The dust hung suspended in the air. Light froze on the stones like amber. Even the crow perched on the roof cocked its head, as if sensing the beginning of something deliciously catastrophic. The divine sees everything. The brother repeated the phrase silently, letting it echo in the inner chambers of his mind. And for the first time in years, it did not bring comfort. It brought confusion, a slippery, shimmering confusion with the texture of cold water slipping beneath a closed door. If the divine sees everything, why did so little change? Why did prayers vanish into the sky without even a courtesy acknowledgement? Why did tragedies fall on good people like divine paperwork errors? Why did Brother Ignacio's snoring continue unpunished and uncorrected for 9 consecutive years? An illusion cracked, a thin, almost transparent one, but real. He swept again, but the movement felt hollow, a gesture performed by someone else. The divine sees everything. Well, did it? Really? Or was that something people said to keep themselves from unraveling? He tried to shake off the thought, tried to sweep faster, as though physical motion could chase off metaphysical discomfort. But the idea stuck to him like cobwebs. And then came the second seed, a trivial moment, a small absurdity, one of those events that would be entirely forgettable if the heart were not already vulnerable. A sparrow fell, right in front of him, not gracefully, not symbolically. It just tripped over its own tiny feet, flapped its wings in a panic, and landed in the dust with a soft "ft." He blinked. The bird blinked back, and he realized nothing in this monastery, not the rituals, not the prayers, not the sacred symbols carved into every available surface, had prepared him for the deeply theological question of why would a divine, orderly universe let a sparrow embarrass itself so publicly? It was ridiculous. But so is doubt. Doubt does not begin with disaster. It begins with absurdity, with something that doesn't fit the clean narrative you've built in your mind. He watched the sparrow stand, puff its feathers indignantly, and scamper away as though trying to erase the memory of its own existence. He continued sweeping, But now the broom felt heavier, the silence sharper, the sunlight intrusive. Something was different, subtle but undeniable. Like the shift in air pressure before a storm, that evening, during prayer, the seed sprouted. The candles flickered erratically, as though the flames themselves were whispering gossip. Monks knelt in rows, their robes brushing the cold stone floor, their voices humming in synchronized devotion. But the brother's mind drifted, not far, just enough. As the chant rose, he felt something strange. A delay, a hesitation, as though the divine ear, once imagined pressed closely to their whispered hymns, had pulled back slightly. His voice faltered. No one noticed. He was usually off-key anyway. He thought of the sparrow. He thought of Brother Aurelio's phrase. He thought of the silence that seemed to grow thicker each night. And suddenly, an absurd idea entered his mind. What if heaven is understaffed? A dangerous thought. Blasphemous to some, hilarious to others. But to him, it felt disturbingly plausible. It explained so much. The unanswered prayers, the inconsistent miracles, the divine signs that felt more like clerical errors. He tried to stop thinking, tried to focus on the chant, on the rhythm, on the ritual. But once a thought like that enters, it does not leave through the same door. It explores the house. It rearranges furniture. It opens locked drawers. And then, the third seed fell into place. A dream. The kind of dream that is not dramatic, not terrifying, not prophetic, but deeply inconvenient. He dreamed he was walking through the monastery library, its towering shelves looming like silent judges. Scrolls and books whispered as he passed, their pages rustling with memories older than any monk alive. In the dream, he stopped at a shelf he knew well, the section containing sacred doctrines, old texts copied so many times by tired human hands that half the margins were filled with indecipherable personal notes. And there, on the spine of one scroll, he saw something impossible. A label, a literal label, written in plain script, Volume 17, pending divine review. He reached out, touched the parchment, and felt it pulse, as if alive, as if embarrassed. And from somewhere deep in the dark aisles behind him came a soft, bureaucratic cough. He woke with a gasp, cold sweat, a racing heart, the distant toll of a bell. At first, he laughed. A nervous, shaky, unconvincing laugh. It was a dream, a strange dream, a dream born from too many late-night readings and too many theological chores. Yet the dream clung to him with the same gentle persistence as doubt. Pending divine review. The phrase echoed, repeated, nested itself in the corners of his mind like a spider weaving webs of uncomfortable logic. He imagined angels stamping documents. He imagined prayers waiting in celestial stacks labeled urgent and someday. He imagined his own pleas stuck in a folder labeled to be determined, and the mouse of doubt, small and harmless and persistent, gnawed. At breakfast, he dropped his spoon. Brother Ignacio assumed it was clumsiness. The brother knew better. Something was wrong. Not with the monastery, not with the rituals, not with the divine, or so he hoped. Something was wrong inside him. An imbalance, a fissure, a restless stirring beneath the neat stone tiles of his faith. He tried to reason with himself. It's nothing. It's just tiredness. It's just the weather. It's a phase. It's a micro-crisis, not a real one. It will pass. This happens to everyone, probably. But that was the problem. The moment you begin listing reasons for why something isn't falling apart, you already know it is. That evening, he returned to the courtyard. The dust glowed in the last sliver of sun. The sparrow, or another equally clumsy one, hopped along the stones with renewed confidence, and the brother whispered to himself, with honesty so soft the wind had to lean in, "I don't know if I believe the way I used to." And the silence answered back, not cruelly, not loudly, just truthfully, "You're beginning to notice." And that was the seed, small, insignificant, almost invisible. But from that seed would grow a forest of doubt, wild, tangled, magnificent, and absolutely unruly. A forest the brother was not prepared to walk through. A forest the divine, perhaps, had been expecting. Because faith, like all living things, does not grow without shadows. And his shadows had finally begun to move. Denial is a curious creature. It doesn't slither in like doubt, nor does it roar like despair. No, denial prances in with confidence, wearing the robe of certainty, humming a cheerful hymn, sprinkling holy water over cracks in the soul, as if cracks could be bribed into disappearing. And the brother, sweet, trembling, almost innocent brother, embraced denial the way one embraces an overeager guest who arrives uninvited, but with pastries. The moment doubt sprouted in him, he reacted exactly as any spiritually overconfident person would. He pretended nothing happened. Oh, he felt it. The shift, the tremor, the tiny theological earthquake beneath his ribs. But he wrapped it in ritual, buried it under candles, and muffled it with chants delivered at a volume rarely heard from someone so consistently off-key. The next morning, he awoke with a self-imposed determination so intense it could have been mistaken for holiness, if holiness included mild desperation and the faint scent of sleep deprivation. He sprang from his cot with an energy he had not displayed since the abbot once announced a surprise delivery of fresh honey. He washed his face with cold water, gasping as though performing an exorcism on his own reflection. He crossed himself 3 times, once for tradition, once for safety, and once for dramatic effect. Then he whispered firmly, "I believe," a declaration, a threat, a plea, a performance, and denial applauded quietly from the shadows. He entered the chapel early, far earlier than the reasonable hour monks usually force themselves to awaken. The candles weren't even lit yet. The dawn hadn't committed to existing. Even the divine, had it been watching, might have muttered, "Really? At this hour?" But he didn't care. He marched straight to the altar with the brisk enthusiasm of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. He lit every candle, even the ones meant for special occasions. Even the ones the abbot specifically said were for festivals only and not to be wasted on personal melodrama. He lit candles until the entire chapel glowed like a holy inferno. Shadows fled. Stone walls shimmered. Icons looked mildly alarmed. Then he prayed. Oh, how he prayed. Not the usual soft contemplative prayers. No. He prayed loudly, boldly, vigorously, with the kind of theatrical devotion that would make a choir raise an eyebrow. At one point, he prayed so intensely he accidentally stood on tiptoe, as if trying to reach the heavens by height alone. If I pray hard enough, he reasoned, the universe will recognize I am still faithful, which is the spiritual equivalent of smiling aggressively at someone you think might be upset with you. He prayed for clarity, devotion, humility, direction, forgiveness, renewed certainty, inner peace, outer peace, the occasional miracle, and, toward the end, perhaps a sign, nothing big, just something tasteful. But the divine, as usual, maintained professional silence, and so denial tightened its grip. Throughout the day, the brother overcompensated with the enthusiasm of someone covering cracks in a wall, by taping glowing icons over them. He scrubbed the floors until the stones glistened like polished confessions. He watered the monastery's sad, wilting plants with such fervor that even the plants looked uncomfortable. He recited hymns while sweeping, a multitasking miracle rarely witnessed, though he kept messing up the verses and substituting words like broom and dust into sacred phrases. At one point, he even attempted to bless the courtyard sparrow who had caused the crisis. The bird, unwilling to participate in theological reconciliation, flew away promptly, but the brother continued his mission. Outpray the doubt. Outwork the uncertainty. Outshine the faint, trembling cracks in his belief. That evening, during communal worship, denial took center stage. He sang louder than everyone. Too loud. So loud, Brother Aurelio turned to him with the expression of a man trying to determine whether divine inspiration or mild possession was occurring. He bowed with exaggerated reverence. He nodded solemnly at every phrase uttered by the abbot, even the ones about agricultural taxes. He folded his hands so tightly during prayer that his knuckles turned the color of theological panic, and he smiled. Oh, the smile. The kind of smile that says, "I am deeply, profoundly, aggressively fine." A smile stretched too wide, too bright, too determined to exist. Inside, doubt watched silently, amused. If I smile convincingly enough, the brother thought, the universe will assume I still have complete faith, as if the divine could be fooled by facial expressions. Later that night, after exhausting every ritual known to the monastery, including one he invented on the spot involving candle wax and vigorous nodding, he returned to his cot, exhausted, spiritually dehydrated, emotionally juggling. He lay down and whispered, "Today, I was strong." But the room, lit by a single flickering candle, seemed to smirk, because strength and denial look terribly similar from the outside. As the candlelight danced across the stone walls like tired angels doing slow choreography, he replayed his day in his mind, the frantic prayers, the feverish devotion, the chores done with intensity bordering on competitive, the forced hymns, the accidental blessing of the bird, the smile, that tight, trembling smile that felt stitched onto his face. And suddenly, quietly, a tiny thought slipped in through the cracks. Who am I trying to convince? He froze. He held his breath. The question floated in the air like a feather made of pure discomfort. Am I trying to convince the divine? Or myself? He pushed the thought away, stuffed it into the same mental drawer where he kept other inconvenient truths, such as he never actually liked fasting. He suspected Brother Ignacio stole bread at night. He once pretended to understand a sacred text that was clearly in the wrong language, and he had no idea what divine plan actually meant, though he nodded as if he did. He closed his eyes. He breathed deeply. He forced himself into sleep with the same determination he used for everything that day. But denial has a scent, a subtle one, sweet, artificial, the scent of something pretending to be whole. And that night, the brother smelled it. Yet he slept anyway, clinging to the illusion that tomorrow would be normal, that today's overzealous devotion had repaired the cracks, that nothing would collapse, that nothing would break. He was wrong. Faith does not heal through force. Doubt does not retreat because someone prays louder. The universe does not respond to theatrics, though it certainly watches them with interest. And denial, for all its enthusiasm, is temporary. But the brother could not see this. Not yet. He lay there, wrapped in a blanket of false certainty, like a man trying to sleep under a tapestry labeled "Everything is fine, please stop looking." And somewhere beyond the monastery walls, beneath the crescent moon and the watchful stars, the wind carried a quiet, conspiratorial whisper. Let him rest. Tomorrow gets interesting. If the brother expected the universe to reward his day of overzealous devotion with clarity, serenity, or even a mild spiritual pat on the head, he was deeply mistaken. Because when the cosmos wishes to test a believer, it does not send thunder or burning bushes or angels descending on beams of immaculate light. No, the universe sends ambiguity, ambiguous signs, confusing coincidences, accidental omens, spiritual nonsense wrapped in symbolic packaging, because nothing destabilizes faith faster than a sign that might mean everything, or absolutely nothing. And thus began the day of useless messages. The dawn arrived with theatrical slowness, creeping over the monastery walls like a hesitant intruder. Mist hovered over the courtyard. The air tasted of damp stone and yesterday's prayers. The brother woke feeling unfinished. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and noticed something odd. His candle, left burning overnight, had melted into a shape that looked vaguely like a face, but not a divine face, not a saint, not a martyr. No. It looked like the baker from the nearby village, the one who always tried to sell the monastery stale bread disguised as extra blessed. The brother frowned. Was this a sign? Was this a warning? Was this simply what happens when wax collapses under the pressure of its own existence? He leaned closer. On one hand, it could be a message about earthly temptation, humility, or the fleeting nature of physical form. On the other, it could be wax, just wax. He decided it was nothing. But denial had already begun to slip. He stepped out into the corridor, where a draft swept through like a ghost rejected from the afterlife for being too dramatic. And there, illuminated by cold morning light, he found the second sign, a small scrap of parchment lying on the floor. He picked it up, expecting perhaps a prayer someone had dropped. But instead, he found written in hurried, messy script, "Don't ignore it." His breath caught. His heart thumped like an overactive monastery drum. Don't ignore what? The wax? The doubt? The sparrow? The universe? The fact that Brother Ignacio definitely stole bread? Something else entirely. He looked around. Nothing. Only silence and shadows that pretended not to stare at him. The brother swallowed hard. Was this a message for him? Or simply a scrap left from one of Brother Aurelio's creative sermon drafts? Last month, Aurelio wrote a sermon so confusing that even the abbot had to whisper, "Are we sure he's okay?" He tucked the parchment into his sleeve, unsure whether to treat it as holy revelation or future kindling. But the day had only begun. During breakfast, the third sign struck. The monks sat quietly, consuming porridge that tasted like the concept of humility. Steam rose from the bowls in soft, ghostly tendrils. The brother lifted his spoon and froze. Right there, floating in his bowl, was a tiny oat that had somehow formed the shape of a perfect, almost perfect circle. A perfect circle, a universal symbol, a divine cipher, a cosmic clue, a sign of eternity, a message from the heavens, or perhaps just a well-rounded grain. He stared at it. The oat stared back. Brother Ignacio leaned over and whispered, "Are you going to eat that or convert it into doctrine?" The brother did not answer. He was too busy spiraling through metaphysical implications he had no business entertaining before breakfast. Throughout the day, the signs multiplied like over-enthusiastic parables. In the chapel, a ray of sunlight fell upon the exact spot where he stood, as if illuminating him with divine purpose, until he stepped to the side. and the light shifted too, following the movement of a passing cloud rather than his spiritual importance. In the library, a book fell off a shelf. Not a holy text, not a revelation, a cookbook, specifically Sacred Soups for Uncertain Souls. It landed at his feet with a thud so dramatic the brother nearly knelt in instinctive reverence. Then he saw the title and sighed. Outside he found a feather, white, pure, soft, perfectly placed on the stone path as though left by an angel forced to meet feather quotas. He picked it up reverently. Then a very disheveled chicken waddled out from behind a pillar. Ah, not a sign, just poultry. But the universe wasn't done yet, not by a long stretch. At midday, he overheard two novices whispering near the well. He didn't mean to listen, but they were whispering with the volume of two people who have never understood what whispering means. One said, "I feel something strange in the air. I think change is coming." The other replied, "I feel it too, in my bones." The brother stiffened. Were they talking about him, his doubt, the shift he felt, the tiny earthquake in his soul? Then the first novice added in a tragic tone, "Yes, I'm almost sure the weather's about to get colder." The second nodded with equal solemnity. "I told you not to sit on the wet stones. Your bones aren't prophets." And just like that, the brother realized he had eavesdropped on meteorology, not mysticism. But the seed of paranoia had sprouted roots. Every sound became symbolic. Every silence felt orchestrated. Every coincidence took on the heavy fragrance of cosmic intention. And yet, none of it actually meant anything. That was the torture. Because the universe is, by nature, ambiguous. And ambiguity is the enemy of comfortable faith. Signs that are too obvious remove mystery. Signs that are too vague remove sanity. The brother found himself trapped in the uncomfortable middle, where every little thing could be a message, and every message could be a little thing. Walking through the cloister, he asked himself, "Was that a sign? Is this a sign? What about that? What about that shadow, that sound, that breeze, that accidental echo that sounded eerily like my name but was absolutely not my name?" By late afternoon, he was exhausted, emotionally sunburned, spiritually cross-eyed, existentially waterlogged. He sat beneath an archway, watching dust swirl in a golden shaft of light. Dust he had seen 1,000 times, but today it felt like something else entirely, as if each mote were a tiny celestial courier carrying a message too small to decipher. A shadow passed over him. The abbot, a serene man, a gentle man, a man whose wisdom ran deep and slow like ancient water. The brother straightened nervously. Surely the abbot would offer guidance, clarity, perspective, something. The abbot placed a hand on his shoulder, leaned in, and whispered, "The tomatoes in the garden are dying again. Please pray for better soil." And then he walked away. The brother stared into nothing. This was not helpful at all. As the sun set, the signs continued. A door that creaked open at the exact moment he sighed, as if answering his despair with the sarcasm. A candle that flickered ominously, only to reveal a tiny moth doing battle with itself. A gust of wind that tousled his robe dramatically, but only because the courtyard was shaped like a wind tunnel. Nothing made sense. Everything could be something. Everything could be nothing. And that is the precise kind of chaos that erodes the soul. By nightfall, he felt fragile, supernaturally fragile, like someone whose inner world had been shaken not by catastrophe, but by too many symbolic maybes. He knelt by his bed, exhausted, trembling at the overwhelming lack of clarity. "Please," he whispered to the universe, "send me a sign I can understand." A moment passed. Another. Silence. Then a loud thump from outside the window. He rushed to look. There, illuminated by moonlight, lay a fallen object. Something heavy. Something mysterious. Something that must have been placed in his path by powerful, intentional cosmic forces. It was a broom. Brother Ignacio had dropped it from the second-floor balcony while trying to shake dust from it. The brother closed his eyes. A laugh escaped his throat. Quiet, trembling, bitter, beautiful. Because this chaotic, ambiguous, unhelpful chaos was his new reality. Faith was wobbling. Signs were useless. The universe was laughing. And he was caught between meaning and meaninglessness, with nothing but his own unraveling certainty for guidance. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, watching candlelight dance like mocking halos. And in the stillness, in the softness, in the dim, holy absurdity of the moment, he whispered, "I think I'm in trouble." The night, ever conspiratorial, replied with silence, the kind of silence that feels like someone smiling in the dark. When faith begins to fail, it never announces itself with clarity or courtesy. It does not knock. It does not schedule an appointment. It does not even send a polite omen beforehand. No, faith collapses the way old roofs do, suddenly, inconveniently, and usually during rain. For the brother, the descent into crisis did not explode. It seeped, a slow leak in the spiritual ceiling, a quiet drip, 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 echoing through the chambers of his soul until every corner felt damp with unease. By the next morning, he woke with a strange sensation, as though he had misplaced something sacred during the night. He sat up. He checked his pockets. He checked under his blanket. He checked the small wooden box where he kept a few sentimental objects, including a pebble he once believed was a divine token. It was not. Everything was in place. Everything except certainty. He stood, and the room tilted, not physically, but metaphysically, as if the world were adjusting itself to his new state of inner wobble. The first ritual of the day, washing his face with icy water, did nothing to help. In fact, the water stung more, as though even the elements sensed he was spiritually weakened and decided to be unnecessarily dramatic about it. He muttered a short prayer, the kind he used for mornings when he felt unusually mortal. "Guide me." But his own voice cracked. It echoed strangely in the small stone room, a fragile echo, thin, unconvincing. He frowned. Was it his tone, his intent, his lack of confidence? The silence that followed seemed to shrug. He walked to the chapel for morning prayer, but something was different. The hall felt wider, colder. The candles flickered in an indecisive rhythm, like they too were uncertain about their purpose. The chants began, soft, harmonic, beautiful in theory. But to the brother, the sound felt hollow, like voices echoing inside an abandoned cathedral. He tried to join in, but his voice wavered dangerously. He sang out of tune, which was normal, but now he could hear it. He could hear everything he didn't want to hear. The tremble, the hesitation, the hollowness within. He whispered to himself, "I just need to focus." But focus required something solid to hold on to, and the solid ground beneath him was beginning to feel suspiciously sandy. After prayer, his tasks began. Sweeping the courtyard, feeding the old mule, carrying water from the well. But nothing felt right. The broom felt heavier. The mule looked at him with alarming wisdom. The water he poured seemed to ripple with judgment. He tried to laugh it off, but even his laughter sounded like someone imitating laughter. by midday, the crisis deepened. He went to the scriptorium to help copy a sacred text. Normally, this task calmed him. Ink, parchment, the gentle scratch of quill on paper, the slow birth of words meant to anchor the world. But not today. Today, every symbol he copied felt suspicious. Every phrase looked like it was hiding something. Every ancient sentence seemed to whisper, "Are you sure?" His hand shook. His strokes slipped. He smudged ink onto 3 lines in a row. Brother Aurelio gave him a look usually reserved for sins of the flesh. The brother tried again. Ink, stroke, word. But mid-sentence, he stopped. He leaned in closer, staring at the manuscript as though it might suddenly confess something. And for a moment, a long, unnerving moment, the words blurred, not because of tears, not because of fatigue, but because his mind refused to accept them. Doctrine he once memorized by heart now looked like riddles, scribbled by someone trying too hard to sound profound. Passages he once used for comfort now felt suspiciously ambiguous. Verses he had recited since childhood suddenly seemed open to interpretation. His breath quickened. His pulse thudded in the tips of his fingers. He whispered, "Why does this feel unfamiliar?" The manuscript did not answer. Wisely, perhaps. He closed the book. A little too quickly. A little too forcefully. Dust swirled. He excused himself, stumbling out of the scriptorium like a man escaping a crime scene. The courtyard felt no safer. He sat by the well, breathing shallowly, watching ripples shimmer on the water's surface. For years, those ripples looked like symbols of spiritual depth. Today, they looked like water. Just water. The kind that mocks you softly when you're having an existential crisis. He stared into the well, and his reflection stared back. Pale, tense, trembling slightly around the eyes. "Am I losing faith?" he whispered. His reflection blinked. Then the wind blew, warping the surface, warping his face into something unrecognizable. A metaphor so on the nose the universe must have been smirking. He jerked away, stood, paced. Everything felt strange. The stones beneath his feet, the crows perched on the roof, the air that hummed with an invisible tension. And every step he took echoed as though the monastery had grown cavernous overnight. But the worst moment, the true beginning of the spiral, came at vespers. Evening prayer, the time of day when shadows lengthen and holy hymns blend with the dying light. A sacred hour, a quiet hour, an hour meant to strengthen the soul. The brother took his place in the row. He bowed his head. He tried, truly, to still his thoughts. The chant began, low, warm, ancient, a river of sound flowing through stone, through hearts, through dust. He closed his eyes. And then, nothing. He felt nothing, not peace, not warmth, not presence. For the first time in his life, the sacred felt silent, empty, hollowed out. He opened his eyes. The candles flickered, each flame trembling like a frightened witness. The monks swayed gently with the rhythm. The abbot stood serene as always. Everything looked normal. But inside him, nothing. A terrifying, cavernous nothing. A nothing that echoed. A nothing that spread. A nothing that tasted like the ashes of old beliefs. He tried to force the feeling back. He reached for it desperately, the way a child reaches for a disappearing lantern in the dark. But the more he reached, the further it drifted. His chest tightened. His breath hitched. He trembled. The chant continued around him, steady and warm, but he felt cold. He felt alone. He felt disconnected from everything he had ever trusted. And the worst part, the irony, that delicious, devastating irony. He had prayed harder than ever and felt less than ever. He had poured devotion into the void, and the void had politely declined. He had run from doubt, and doubt had simply outpaced him. His faith had not shattered in a dramatic explosion of cosmic betrayal. It had dimmed, quietly, softly, like a candle running out of wax in the middle of a silent night. After prayer, he slipped away before anyone could speak to him. He walked blindly through the corridors, unsure whether he was moving toward safety or deeper into the labyrinth. His steps echoed. His breath wavered. Shadows clung to the walls like old regrets. He returned to his room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of his bed, trembling. "Why?" he whispered into the dim. "Why now? Why this? Why me?" The silence felt heavy, so heavy it pressed against his ribs. He bowed his head. He pressed his palm to his forehead. He exhaled a shaking breath. And for the first time, the very first time, he allowed himself to admit, "I don't know what I believe anymore." The words left his mouth like shards of broken glass, painful, sharp, inevitable. Somewhere outside, the monastery bell tolled, deep, slow, ancient. It sounded less like a call to prayer and more like a warning. The descent had begun. Tomorrow it would get worse, much worse. But tonight, the brother sat in the dim glow of a half-burned candle, hands trembling, heart cracked, faith flickering. A man standing on the fragile bridge between certainty and the abyss. And the abyss, patient and amused, waited for him to lean just a little further. Crisis does not ask permission to become catastrophe. It simply arrives, like a guest who shows up hours early, tracks mud onto your clean floors, and asks what's for dinner. And for the brother, the day of breaking dawned with the kind of innocently golden sunrise that should, by all rights, have been illegal. The sky was too soft, the air too gentle, the clouds too beautifully arranged, as if auditioning for a sermon about divine order. It was the kind of morning that suggested everything in the universe was in perfect harmony, which, naturally, meant something was about to go horribly wrong. The brother woke from a dream he couldn't remember. He sat up with a heaviness in his bones, the kind that whispered, "Today is the day." The candle on his table had burned down to a crooked stump, like a tired monk leaning on a cane. Wax clung to the table in strange rivulets, small, hardened rivers flowing toward a destination they would never reach. He rubbed his eyes. He tried to breathe. He tried to pretend nothing had changed, but everything had. His soul felt like a cracked cup, still holding something, but leaking drop by drop. He stood. His knees wobbled with the theatrical precision of someone about to faint in a medieval painting. He pressed a hand against the wall. Cold stone. Always reliable stone. Except today, even the stone felt uncertain under his touch. The monastery's morning bell echoed through the hallways like a reminder of vows he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. He walked toward the chapel. Slowly, as if the air had thickened into honey, as if each step required negotiation with the ground. And when he entered the chapel, it was silent. Not peaceful silent. No, not the gentle hush of early prayer. This silence felt thick, heavy, burdened, as though the very air were holding its breath. Candles flickered in the dimness, their flames trembling like small souls begging not to be extinguished. The brother took his usual place. He knelt. He closed his eyes. He waited for the familiar warmth, the hum, the whisper of presence, but it didn't come. Instead, a wave of emptiness washed over him, powerful, cold, total. He gasped softly. The emptiness deepened, expanded, spread through him like ink leaking into water. His hands trembled. His breath quickened, his pulse stuttered. This was not doubt, this was absence. The absence of something that had always been there, even when faint. The absence of the quiet anchor he'd relied on since childhood. The absence that felt like a door inside him had been slammed shut. He clutched his chest, as though hoping to physically grasp whatever had slipped away. His whisper cracked, "Please, be here, please." But all he heard was the hollow echo of his own desperation bouncing off stone walls. The candles swayed. Shadows shifted. The room seemed to tilt. And then it happened. The moment that would split his life into before and after. A sound, soft but sharp, like a piece of glass cracking. Except it didn't come from the chapel, it came from inside him. He opened his eyes. The world distorted. The candles doubled. The shadows stretched. The air rippled like heat over desert sand. He blinked, but reality kept bending. He heard whispers. Not divine, not demonic, not even coherent. Just whispers, like 1,000 pages rustling all at once, like old scriptures arguing among themselves. His heartbeat thundered. His breath caught. His vision blurred. He felt the ground beneath him tilt. And suddenly, the chapel, the sacred place he had trusted his entire life, began to feel hostile. The icons seemed to watch him with silent disapproval. The altar loomed like an accusation. The candles hissed faintly, as if mocking his shaken soul. He stumbled to his feet. His voice quivered. I can't hear you." Nothing answered. The silence was not empty. It was oppressive, suffocating, as though silence itself had weight. He staggered backward, bumping into a pew, nearly falling. His hands trembled violently. His breath came in shallow, sharp gasps. He felt small, lost, ridiculously mortal. Panic clamped around his chest like an iron band. He pressed his palms to the side of his head. "Please, just something, anything, a whisper, a sign, a feeling, a presence, please." He waited. The universe waited. Nothing. Until a flicker. Not spiritual, physical, one candle, just one. Died, extinguished itself in a hiss of smoke. A thin wisp curled into the air like a mocking question mark. He stared at it. Frozen, collapsed inside his own skin. Was this a sign? Was this an accident? Was this the universe delivering deadpan humor? In that moment, it felt like all three. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the floor. The stone was cold, mercilessly cold, a cold that seeped into him like water into cracks, widening every fracture. Tears gathered, unwanted. He blinked them away, but they returned, persistent as regret. His voice broke open. "Why would you leave? Why now? Why like this?" No answer. The silence pulsed, deep, resounding, absolute. Faith had not merely dimmed, it had imploded. He curled slightly forward, arms wrapped around himself like a man bracing against a storm no one else could see. And then, in the middle of that sacred emptiness, something strange happened. He laughed, softly at first. A desperate, incredulous laugh. A laugh that tasted like salt and despair and revelation. Because he suddenly understood something horrifyingly funny. Nothing is more spiritual than a spectacular failure. Nothing humbles the soul like the divine refusing to perform on cue. Nothing reveals the truth more clearly than a sacred space echoing with your own unanswered pleas. He laughed again. A broken, cracked laugh. Shadows flickered, bending forward as if listening, and the brother whispered with tremor and irony, "So this is faith breaking, not with thunder, but with nothingness." The realization struck him hard. He wasn't losing faith. He was witnessing it shatter, each fragment falling inward, each piece reflecting a different fear, each crack revealing truths he never wanted to see. He pressed a trembling hand over his heart. He felt the emptiness there, too vast, too heavy. And yet there was also something else, a strange, piercing clarity, a sliver of understanding lodged deep in the chaos. The divine had not disappeared. It had simply abandoned the illusion of being predictable. It had stepped out of the neat box he had placed it in, walked off the page, left the script, gone on theological vacation, and what was left was truth. Raw, quiet, terrifying. The brother knelt there, breath shaking, tears slipping down his face, laughter fading into a hollow ache. He whispered, "I don't know what's real anymore." And the universe, tired, amused, ancient, finally broke its silence, not with a voice, not with a sign, with a feeling. A soft, subtle, painful feeling, not presence, not comfort, but recognition. The quiet, devastating recognition that nothing is more sacred than reaching the end of what you thought was faith and finding yourself still searching. His crisis was complete, his certainty shattered, his soul disassembled, and yet he was still there, still breathing, still hurting, still awake, still wanting. The chapel, once warm, felt colder now, but colder meant real, colder meant honest. He wiped his face with a trembling hand. He stood on shaking legs. He looked at the extinguished candle one last time. Then he whispered, voice raw, "So this is the beginning." And it was. The beginning of something he didn't yet understand. Something painful. Something true. Something holy in the most inconvenient, uncomfortable, irreverent way possible. Faith had failed spectacularly, but the story had only just begun. After soul breaks, the world does not immediately crumble with it. It doesn't burst into flames or collapse into ruins or unleash divine reprimands. No thunder, no trembling earth, no supernatural applause. Instead, the world simply continues, quietly, indifferently, almost mockingly. The morning after the brothers' collapse, the sun rose with the same golden gentleness as always, shining cheerfully into the monastery courtyard, as though nothing existentially catastrophic had occurred the night before. Birds sang, the wind hummed, the stones sat with ancient patience, and the brother felt hollow. Not dramatically hollow, not the poetic hollow of tragic legends. No, he felt the slow, aching, mundane hollow of a man who has misplaced something irreplaceable. He sat on the edge of his cot, staring at his hands, hands that had prayed 1,000 times, held hope 1,000 more, and now trembled with a quiet uncertainty he didn't know how to hide. The silence in the room was different. It didn't feel empty. It felt full of the absence of what used to be there. A presence gone, a warmth extinguished, a sense of direction erased, the kind of silence that doesn't just sit beside you. It looks at you. He tried to swallow the tension in his throat, but it lingered, stubborn as dust. The candle on his table, the same candle that had watched him unravel the night before, had burned out completely. Its wick lay buried in a pool of hardened wax like a failed prophecy. He felt a ridiculous urge to apologize to it. Instead, he stood slowly and walked to the window. The courtyard stretched beneath him, stone arches, old fountains, patches of stubborn grass that grew in defiance of prayer and neglect. Everything looked unchanged. Everything sounded unchanged. Everything was unchanged, except him. Inside him, something fundamental had shifted. The world was the same, but seen through a cracked lens. He stepped into the hallway, His footsteps echoed, too loudly, too sharply, as though rebounding off the new emptiness inside him. He hated the sound. He walked to the chapel, the scene of last night's implosion. The moment he stepped inside, the air felt colder, not physically, but spiritually. The candles were relit. The room was bright, warm, alive. And yet, he felt the same chill as before, the same hollow echo in his chest, the same sensation of standing in a place everyone else understood but that he no longer instinctively recognized. He stood there for a long time, listening, not for a voice, not for a miracle, just listening. A monk entered quietly from the side door and began tidying the altar. The brother stepped aside with polite instinct. "Did you pray early this morning?" the monk asked casually, not looking at him. The brother opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He didn't know what to say. Had he prayed? No. Yes, he had tried. But prayer without belief felt like wind pushing against a closed door. The monk didn't notice his hesitation. He simply assumed an answer that made sense. "Ah, you look tired. Early devotion will do that." And with that, he walked away. The brother exhaled slowly. So this, he realized, was how it would be. The world assuming he was fine because he could imitate fine. He left the chapel. Every corridor felt longer today. Every breath felt heavier. Every shadow seemed to lean forward, curious about the new fracture in him. At breakfast, he sat at the long wooden table. His bowl of porridge steamed softly, quiet spirals rising like the ghosts of unspoken questions. He lifted his spoon. His hand shook, barely, but enough that he noticed. Brother Ignacio sat beside him, blissfully ignorant, already devouring his third portion with the zeal of a man whose faith had never once been inconvenienced. Ignacio nudged him. "You're quiet today." The brother forced a small smile, a thin one, like a stretched thread about to snap. "Didn't sleep well," he murmured. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth. Ignacio shrugged and returned to eating, undisturbed by existential crisis within a 5-foot radius. The brother lowered his gaze to his bowl. The porridge surface trembled slightly. He stared. Steam. Heat. Tiny bubbles forming and popping. A small swirl forming where he had dipped the spoon. He realized he was watching it the way one watches a dying fire, hoping for warmth, but finding only smoke. He put the spoon down. He couldn't eat. He left the hall quietly, unnoticed. Outside, the wind moved through the archways with a gentle moan, like a tired spirit drifting without a destination. He sat on the old bench near the fig tree, a tree that had grown in that courtyard for decades and had heard more confessions than the abbot. The tree offered no comfort, but at least it didn't pretend to. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, let the breeze graze his face. He whispered into the air, "What now?" The breeze answered with nothing but the scent of dust and old twigs. He rubbed his palms against his knees. He felt small, not humble small, not wholly small, just small. He had lost something he couldn't name, and the loss was shaping his whole world into unfamiliar geometry. How does one heal from losing certainty? How does one rebuild belief after it crumbles? How does one pray into a silence that doesn't apologize? He didn't know. But the silence stayed, sitting beside him like a companion with terrible social skills. He stood eventually, because sitting with his own thoughts felt like being interrogated by shadows. He wandered the monastery grounds with no real purpose. Past the herb garden, past the laundry lines, past the goat pen where a very judgmental goat stared as if sensing spiritual dysfunction. He walked until he reached the outer wall, the place where monks sometimes stood to contemplate the valley below. He placed his hands on the cold stone and looked out. The landscape was vast, rolling hills, sunlit fields, small distant homes, thin trails of smoke from morning fires. And for the first time in his life, the view felt indifferent. Nature did not feel sacred. The wind did not feel wise. The world did not feel guided. Everything felt normal, painfully, brutally normal. He swallowed. "Is this how unbelievers see the world?" he whispered. "No pattern, no voice, no warmth?" He wasn't mocking them. He envied them, because they were prepared for silence. He was not. A crow landed on the wall beside him. It cawed once, a sharp sound that echoed through the stillness. He turned his head slowly, meeting its dark gaze. The crow tilted its head. It looked, as it often did, like it knew something important. He exhaled a broken laugh. "Unless you are the divine, speaking through unusual vessels, please don't start giving me advice." The crow blinked, unimpressed, and flew away. He closed his eyes again. He felt emptied, drained, a vessel scraped clean. The silence in his chest felt deeper than the silence in the monastery, and yet, in that silence, something shifted. Not comfort, not guidance, not hope, but space. A strange, frightening space. An awareness that his old beliefs were gone, yes, but that meant there was room for something else, something new, something unshaped, unnamed, unforced. But it was too soon to think of rebuilding. He was still surrounded by the ashes of what once held him together. Ashes settle slowly, quietly, painfully. He returned to his room at dusk. The corridor was filled with long shadows that stretched like tired monks returning from pilgrimage. His candle waited on the table, extinguished, cold, tilted. He lit it. The flame rose, steady at first, then trembling. He watched it dance. He whispered, "I don't know how to pray to you anymore." The flame flickered. He added softer, "I don't know if you hear me, or if I've been talking to myself all these years, or if my faith was just fear." The candle leaned, wavered, glowed. He closed his eyes. The silence grew again, filling the room, filling him. But this silence, this particular silence, was different from the mornings. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't mocking. It was waiting. Not comforting, but waiting. Like a space held open, like a question unanswered, like a page in an unwritten scripture. He breathed, slowly, deeply. He didn't speak again. He didn't cry again. He simply existed in the quiet, no longer fighting it, no longer resisting it, no longer demanding sound from the void. He let the silence be. And in return, the silence let him be. For now. And that was enough. Barely, but enough. Revelations, as humans like to imagine them, are clear, crisp, brilliant, delivered with a flourish of trumpets or the sudden opening of the heavens, preferably accompanied by a warm breeze and a conveniently placed beam of light. But real revelations, the dangerous kind, the transformative kind, the honest to the point of cruelty kind, are nothing like that. They are quiet, ambiguous, half-born fragments of meaning wrapped in confusion, revelations that might be divine, or psychological, or something embarrassingly mundane. And that was exactly the kind the brother received. It began on the night after the silence had finally settled inside him. Not comfortably, but at least without sharp edges. He couldn't sleep. Not for lack of trying. He lay still beneath his blanket, eyes closed, breathing slow, hoping unconsciousness would swallow him whole. But consciousness clung to him, with a stubbornness usually reserved for regrets and tax collectors. The air in his room felt unusually warm, too warm. It pressed against his skin, heavy and strange, as though the night had decided to sit on his chest and observe him up close. The candle beside him burned low, its flame thin, shivering, fragile, like a sliver of light fighting for its last few breaths. He turned on his side. The flame flickered violently. He frowned. He sat up. The flame steadied itself. He blinked. "Don't start," he whispered to it. Too tired to fear or believe or analyze, the flame did not respond. But the room changed. Subtly, quietly, imperceptibly at first. The shadows on the wall shifted, not in the random, lazy way shadows drift, but with purpose, with intention. He rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, the shadows had rearranged themselves into shapes, into something almost recognizable. Almost. He leaned forward, squinting. Were they forming a face? A symbol? A message? Or was he simply exhausted? He whispered to the darkness, "If you're going to say something, say it clearly." The darkness naturally ignored him. It shifted again, and this time reshaped itself into something undeniably meaningful, or absolutely meaningless. It looked like a hand, a human hand made of shadow. Long fingers, curved palm, reaching. But reaching from where? For what? Toward whom? His breath stilled. "Are you real?" he whispered. The shadow hand trembled, then dissolved, as if embarrassed. He sat frozen, every hair on his arms rising, every instinct screaming for interpretation. A sign, a warning, a hallucination, a metaphor staged by candlelight. He didn't know, but the air grew colder, and the candle flickered again, this time shrinking, bowing, nearly extinguishing itself. He held his breath. The flame steadied, straightened, brightened, and then, without warning, it leaned left, sharply, as if pointing. He followed its direction. His gaze landed on the far corner of his room, the one where the wall stones didn't fit perfectly, where a faint draft sometimes whispered through cracks, where dust collected despite his daily sweeping. He stood, slow, cautious, drawn by something he couldn't name. The candle crackled softly, almost encouragingly. He approached the corner. At first he saw nothing, then a glint, a tiny sliver of something metallic, catching the faint candlelight. He knelt. A small object lay there, half buried in dust. Something he had never seen before. Something that did not belong in his room. Something that should have been impossible in a place as obsessively organized as the monastery. He reached for it. His fingers hesitated. The candle wavered. He picked it up. A coin, but not a common one. Its edges were uneven, worn. Its surface bore symbols he didn't recognize. Circles intertwined, lines crossing in ways that made no geometric sense. A faint engraving of something like a face, or a mask, or a trick of reflected wax light. He turned it in his palm. It hummed, very softly, deeply, as if murmuring to itself. His heart drummed against his ribs. "What?" he breathed. "Are you?" But the coin remained stubbornly silent. He stood slowly, turning it over again and again. This was a sign. It had to be a sign, placed here for him, delivered by some unseen hand, a divine whisper, a message, a clue. His breath quickened with the thrill of possible meaning. But then, a thought intruded. An inconvenient, unwelcome, painfully ironic thought. What if it simply fell from someone's pocket? The possibility flattened him. He closed his fist around the coin. Hard. His pulse thundered. Would the divine use such an object? Would a message from heaven be so crude, so random, so anticlimactic? He felt dizzy. The shadows shifted again. The candle bent its flame as though leaning closer. The brother swallowed hard. "Is this from you?" he whispered. The silence deepened. Then, something strange, a sound. Not outside, not in the hallway, not the old stone settling. A sound within himself, like a string plucked, a soft vibration in the chest. A chord struck in some hidden instrument inside him. The coin vibrated. He nearly dropped it. The shadows on the wall twisted, bowed inward, collapsed into one another, as though drawn by an invisible center, a point. The air thickened. His heartbeat slowed. The silence grew so dense he felt it against his skin. And in that silence, in that crushing stillness, in that unbearable fullness, something rose. A feeling, sharp, hot, cold, indescribable. A feeling that might have been divine presence, or might have been fear, or might have been a sudden surge of blood to the head. He exhaled shakily. The coin burned cold in his palm. His pulse stuttered. His breath trembled. His vision blurred for a moment, just one moment. And in that moment he saw something, not with his eyes, with something else. He saw a path, a dark one, a winding one, not physical, not imaginary, a path made of possibility, uncertainty, silence, depth. A path that led away from everything he had known, away from doctrine, away from ritual, away from certainty, a path that might lead to truth, or nothing, or madness, or enlightenment, or hunger. He blinked once, and the vision vanished. He gasped, stumbled back, dropped the coin. It hit the stone floor with a sharp, metallic ring that echoed longer than physics should allow. When he picked it up again, it felt normal, just metal, cold, lifeless. He shook his head. "What was that?" he whispered. "What did I see?" No answer. He stood in his dim room, coin in hand, shadows shifting like breath, candle flickering with the fragility of hope. And he realized, with a trembling mixture of awe and frustration, that he didn't know if he had experienced a divine revelation, a hallucination from exhaustion, or a strange gust of wind interacting with an old coin. He didn't know. He couldn't know. And that was the revelation. Uncertainty itself. Mystery as the message. Not clarity, but ambiguity so rich and heavy it felt almost sacred. He sank onto his bed, the coin in his hand, the candle nearly dead, the shadows breathing around him. He whispered, "Was that you?" A breeze entered the room, gentle, cold, and unapologetically mysterious. It extinguished the candle. Darkness swallowed everything, and in that darkness he heard nothing, saw nothing, knew nothing, but felt something, or maybe nothing at all. And he realized, with a weary and ironic clarity, that was the closest thing to a revelation he could bear. The night after the ambiguous revelation did not end. It simply softened and then dissolved into a morning that felt too fragile for names. The brother did not sleep. He drifted, floated, lay suspended somewhere between exhaustion and awakening, as if the world had dimmed its edges to give him room to breathe without thinking. When he finally rose from his cot, the coin still lay on the table beside him, a cold, unmoving witness to whatever had occurred or not occurred the night before. He stared at it. The symbols carved into its surface didn't shift now. They didn't glow. They didn't hum. They simply existed, as stubbornly mundane as the chipped bowl where he kept his soap. He lifted it, turned it in his hand. It felt like a relic. It felt like a mistake. It felt like nothing. He closed his fingers around it, and in the quiet press of skin against metal, he felt a truth slip quietly into him. Not every sign means something, and not every meaning needs a sign. He sat down, elbows on the table, palms against his temples. What was he supposed to do now? He didn't know how to believe anymore. he didn't know how to disbelieve either. He was caught in the uncomfortable center between yes and no, faith and void, devotion and disappointment. He whispered into the stale morning air, "I am neither who I was nor who I am becoming." A strange place to be, a sacred place, maybe, or maybe just a deeply annoying one. He dressed slowly that morning, moving with the deliberate care of someone who feels as though even gravity is unsure how much it should weigh. When he stepped into the hallway, the monastery greeted him with its usual quiet, stone, cold breath of dawn, distant scraping of brooms, faint rustle of robes, the soft, persistent heartbeat of a place that had outlived countless personal crises. Nothing in the monastery changed. Only he had. He walked to morning prayer, but did not enter the chapel. He stood outside the doorway, watching the warm candlelight spill across the floor, like a memory from a life he no longer fully occupied. He listened to the chant. It rose and fell with practiced harmony, a river of voices flowing around words older than their bones. He waited for the moment he would feel drawn inside, pulled by habit or longing or guilt. It didn't come. Instead, he felt something else, something quieter, darker, more honest. The faint, steady pulse of a soul still breaking, but also quietly rebuilding itself in some deeper place he couldn't yet see. He turned away. He walked into the courtyard. The morning light was soft, brushing the stones with a pale warmth that felt neither comforting nor hostile. Simply real. He sat on the old bench under the fig tree. Its branches trembled gently in the breeze, sprinkling tiny specks of dust that glowed briefly in the sun before disappearing. Dust, always dust. The monastery's most consistent blessing. He rested his head back, eyes half closed, letting the world settle around him. And then, something curious happened. Not miraculous, not dramatic, nothing candle-worthy. A young novice approached, barely 20, eyes wide with the open sincerity of someone whose faith had not yet been dented by the complications of existence. "Brother," the novice said, "you weren't at morning prayer." The brother inhaled. He had feared this moment, the confrontation, the questions, the subtle pressure to return to the version of himself he no longer fit into. But the novice did not accuse, did not probe, did not even look concerned. He simply sat beside him on the bench, legs dangling slightly above the ground like a child sitting at the edge of a river. "I've been thinking," the novice said suddenly, "about how no one really understands anything. Not fully, not even the abbot, especially not Brother Ignazio." The brother blinked. The novice continued, "I used to think faith was about knowing. Now I think it's more about staying." He shrugged. "Even when you don't know why." The brother stared at him, stunned by the simplicity and the accidental wisdom of the statement. He wanted to respond, wanted to say something profound or grateful or appropriately monk-like, but no words came, so he simply nodded. The novice offered him half a smile, stood, and walked away with the serene confidence of someone who had planted a seed without realizing its power. The brother watched him leave, and something in his chest loosened, just slightly. Not healed, not restored, but softened, shifted, moved. He looked down at the coin in his hand, a useless object, a holy object, an ambiguous object. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. He didn't need to decide today. He slipped it into the pocket of his robe like someone placing a question into a drawer for later consideration. He stood, walked through the courtyard, past the archways, past the herb garden, past the shadows lingering beneath the east corridor. He reached the outer wall again, where the valley stretched beneath him in all its careless beauty. For a long time, he simply stood there, breathing, watching, existing. No revelation, no answer, no sudden burst of divine meaning, just breath, just presence, just the strange, raw truth of being alive while uncertain. He whispered to the open air, "I don't know where this road leads." The wind stirred, soft, cold, almost amused. He closed his eyes, and with a quiet, trembling courage he didn't recognize as his own, he added, "But I'll walk it anyway." He stood a moment longer, letting the words settle, letting the world hear them, letting himself hear them. Finally, he turned away from the valley and walked back toward the monastery, not with conviction, not with clarity, but with intention. His faith was not restored. His doubt was not resolved. His questions remained unanswered, but something subtle had shifted in him, a balance, a permission, a willingness to continue even in the fog. Faith had failed spectacularly, but maybe, in some strange and quietly sacred way, that failure was a beginning. He reached his room again. The candle was still out, its wick blackened, stiff, bent. He touched it gently with the tip of his finger. "Perhaps tomorrow," he murmured, "you and I will try again." A soft laugh escaped him, wounded, fragile, but real. And as he stepped back into the dim corridor, unable to see more than a few steps ahead, he whispered one last, ironic, perfectly human truth. Or perhaps God was busy, or avoiding messages, like everyone else on a Monday. The hall swallowed his whisper, and he walked on. Night returned as it always does, with the slow certainty of something that has seen too much and refuses to be impressed any more. It slipped over the monastery like a dark cloak, soft but heavy, settling into the corners where the light did not argue. The day's sounds withdrew one by one. Footsteps, murmurs, the clatter of bowls, the muttered complaints about cold floors and early bells. One by one they dimmed and vanished, like thoughts at the edge of sleep. In one small stone room, a single candle burned again. Not bravely, not heroically, just persistently. Its flame bent and straightened with each faint breath of air, hovering between life and extinction, like a question that refuses to decide whether it wants an answer. The brother sat beside it. He looked older now, not in years, but in expression. There was a new kind of weight behind his eyes, the kind that doesn't come from time, but from realizing time is not what you thought it was. His shoulders seemed slightly less straight, his hands slightly less certain, as if he no longer trusted them to always do what they'd done before. On the table before him lay the coin. It gleamed faintly in the candlelight, catching each small flicker and returning it with an indifferent shimmer. He had cleaned it carefully, as if polishing clarity from its surface. But the symbols remained just as unreadable, just as stubborn, just as unwilling to explain themselves. He turned it slowly between his fingers, listening to the tiny whispered scrape of metal against skin. Once he would have demanded meaning. Once he would have begged, "Show me, tell me, explain." Now he simply watched. "Maybe," he murmured softly, "you are nothing more than what you seem. And maybe that is what makes you holy." The room answered with quiet. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the cool stone against the back of his head. It grounded him in a way belief once did. The stone did not pretend to understand him. It did not offer comfort or judgment. It simply existed, untroubled by theology. Outside his small window, the sky was black velvet embroidered with indifferent stars. They glittered faintly, not kindly, not cruelly, simply present. Somewhere beyond those scattered lights, people like to think, was heaven, or something like it, or nothing at all. He had stopped trying to picture it. Instead, he had begun quietly, tentatively to pay attention to the strange, unsteady heaven that sometimes flickered inside his ribcage, as small moments of honesty, of stillness, of unadorned presence that came without ritual or chant. The heaven that did not answer questions, but somehow made room for them. On the floor near his cot, a thin trail of dust glowed in the candlelight. Dust drifting from the ceiling, from the old stones, from the centuries of people who had lived and believed and doubted and died here. Dust that had once been skin, prayers, parchment, bread, hair, dried leaves, extinguished candles, a quiet congregation of everything that had ever fallen apart. He watched it. Everything returns to dust, he whispered, but no one mentions how beautiful it looks on the way down. His own words surprised him. He almost smiled. He thought of who he had been before the crack. The brother who knelt with certainty, who prayed by habit, who believed because it was easier than not believing. The brother who thought heaven was an office with orderly shelves and timely responses. The brother whose faith was a chair, steady enough to hold his weight if he didn't move too much. That version of himself now felt like a character from someone else's story. He didn't hate him. He didn't envy him either. He simply understood him. That brother had needed certainty. This one had learned how to stand without it. Or at least, how to tremble more honestly. He opened his eyes again. The candle's flame narrowed for a second, then steadied. He laughed under his breath, a small, tired sound. "You're holding on," he told it, "out of sheer stubbornness. I suppose I should respect that." The flame, of course, did not care. He stood slowly and moved toward the tiny window. The night air seeped in, cool and sharp, smelling of damp stone and distant earth. In the far distance, almost too faint to hear, a dog barked in some unseen village. Life continuing without his permission. He rested his hands on the windowsill and looked out. Somewhere down in the valley, people were going to bed with unasked questions lodged in their hearts. Some were praying fervently. Some were not praying at all. Some were convinced. Some were angry. Some were tired. Some, like him, stood in the doorway between believing and not believing, wondering if either side truly wanted them. "You're not alone," he whispered to no one and everyone at once. You never were. Even when you thought you were the only one failing at this. The stars continued their quiet, ancient blinking, as if trying to tell him, "You are not that interesting, and that, too, is a kind of mercy." He turned back to the table. The coin waited, patient, like a question that knows time is on its side. He took it again and closed his hand around it, not as a relic, not as proof, not as a divine key to some hidden doctrine, but as a reminder that not everything is supposed to resolve, that some things, maybe the most important things, arrive not as answers, but as interruptions. He thought of the dream in the library, of the pending divine review, of the silence that felt like abandonment, and the silence that felt like space, of the night when everything inside him cracked and no one came to pick up the pieces for him. He had not received closure, no neat ending, no magical restoration of his old faith. Instead, he had received something far less impressive and far more difficult, the invitation to live without guarantees. He set the coin back down and moved toward the candle. Its flame fluttered as he approached, as if it sensed the possibility of extinction. He watched it for a long moment. Once, he would have protected it at all costs. Once, he would have feared the darkness too much to risk it. Now, he simply blew. The flame went out with a soft, almost apologetic sigh. Smoke curled upward, white and ghostly, then thinned and vanished, leaving only the faint scent of burnt wick. The room sank into shadow. But it was not pure darkness. Light seeped in from the small window, weak but present, enough to see the outline of the table, of the coin, of his own hand resting beside it. It struck him, in that quiet, that he was not afraid, not of the dark, not of the silence, not of the absence. Fear had moved aside, just enough to make room for something stranger, a fragile, unresolved respect for the mystery. He sat again, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced loosely. "Maybe you are there," he said into the half-light. "Maybe you are not. Maybe you are something that does not fit into my little words at all. Maybe I will never know. Maybe that is the point." His throat tightened, not with panic, but with something that tasted suspiciously like grief and acceptance mixed together. "If you are there," he continued, "I won't pretend I understand you any more, or that I know what you want, or that I know how to find you, but if you are listening, I will keep looking. Not because I'm sure, but because I'm still here." He exhaled slowly, and if you're not there, he hesitated. The words felt heavy. If you're not there, then it is still something. This ache, this searching, this strange tenderness when I look at the world, even when it does not make sense. It is still something to get up for. It is still something to light a candle for. It is still something to walk with. He smiled faintly, eyes stinging. "Either way, I suppose I'm stuck with this heart, and whatever it insists on wanting." Outside, a thin breeze moved through the cloister, stirring old dust, making the torches in the corridor flicker. The monastery breathed in its sleep. He leaned back against the wall again, letting his head rest, letting his eyes close. He was not at peace. Not really, not completely. Perhaps never again in the naive way he once had been. But there was a new kind of stillness in him. Not the stillness of certainty, but the stillness of someone who has stopped demanding that reality unfold according to their expectations. Somewhere inside that stillness, the quiet possibility lingered that the divine, if it existed at all, might prefer honesty to conviction, brokenness to performance, questions to recitations. Perhaps heaven kept a separate shelf for prayers that did not know what they were asking for. He found that thought oddly comforting. The night thickened. Dust drifted lazily in the thin silver light from the window. In the darkness, the coin lay barely visible. A small, cold sun waiting for a dawn that might or might not come. Time stretched, and now, slowly, the walls of the monastery dissolve. The stone room becomes less solid, the candleless table less firm under your mental hand. The brother's figure grows softer, more transparent, becoming what he always was to you, a reflection, a story, a metaphor dressed in a robe. Because you are here too. Not in a monastery, perhaps, not with candles and stone and distant bells, but in your own quiet room, with your own faint light glowing inches from your face, with your own questions breathing softly in the dark, refusing to fall asleep just because you've decided it's bedtime. You, who have prayed to something at some time, even if you didn't call it prayer. You who have asked the ceiling for a sign. You who have stared at your phone, or at the shadows, or at the slow turning blades of a fan, and whispered, "Are you there?" Or, "Is this it?" Or, "What now?" You, whose faith, whatever shape it takes, has failed spectacularly, at least once, in the privacy of your own mind. The brother's candle is out. Yours flickers in pixels. The same night sits around you both. Maybe you believe. Maybe you don't. Maybe you hover in that trembling center where belief and disbelief hold hands and argue about who gets to name things. Wherever you are in that strange geometry, the story leans closer to you now, like a whispered confession in a dark church, like a late-night conversation with someone who doesn't need you to pretend. Faith is absurd. Doubt is absurd. The universe is absurd. And yet, somehow, here you are, listening to stories about monks and candles and coins and divine silence, letting them echo against the soft, tired walls of your own heart. Maybe that's all this ever was, a way to keep each other company in the great cosmic uncertainty. A shared lantern in a hallway no one remembers entering. The night stretches on. Your eyes grow heavier. The details blur. The brother sits in his small stone room, neither saint nor heretic, neither lost nor found, simply continuing. Not with fiery certainty, but with a quiet, ironic, stubborn willingness to stay present inside a mystery that does not owe him explanations. You lie in your bed, or on your couch, or in whatever little corner of the world you've chosen to make your temporary nest, and you breathe, perhaps a little slower now, perhaps with just a bit more gentleness toward your own unanswered questions. Somewhere between his silence and yours, between his coin and your screen, between his failing faith and your tired curiosity, a thin, trembling thread stretches. It does not promise answers. It does not guarantee peace. But it does say, very softly, you are not alone in not knowing. That, sometimes, is holier than certainty. The dust settles, the night holds, the story sinks into your bones, not as doctrine, but as a kind of quiet, exhausted companionship. A last image remains, a bare stone room, a table, a coin reflecting the faint light from a distant star, a man sitting in the dark, eyes open, heart cracked, still willing to listen. A last echo remains, your own breath, steady, imperfect, continuing. And as the story slowly loosens its hold on you, as your thoughts begin to drift and your body softens into the slow gravity of sleep, one last, gentle, slightly ironic invitation burns at the edge of the darkness. Less like a command, more like a crooked smile. If this story kept you awake a little longer tonight, subscribe to Religious Night Stories, where faith never sleeps, even if you do.